Hey there, friends. David Pauilides, Canada Missing Project. That is the executive producer, Huck, sawing logs. If you're really lucky tonight, you may hear her snore through this entire event. Yes, it will be historic, and it will be loud. And just maybe you will hear that. All right. And away we go. So, if you don't know, I've released this movie, American Sasquatch, just a little over a week ago. It's doing really, really good. I've had a lot of interesting comments. And if you have watched it on Amazon or Apple TV, please go on and leave a review. It helps us immensely. I don't ask for a lot. Just give a review. Really, it helps. Thank you. Now, this is a show about missing people. So we should talk about that. One of the first 7 books I wrote was this book called Missing 411, A Sobering Coincidence. What it has to do with is people, usually, who are drinking, usually men, who disappear. Nobody sees them disappear. Nobody knows how they disappear, but they end up in water. Now, what maybe some of you who don't know, haven't seen, is on the back of the book, I put a map of the U.S. And in this map, you can kind of see all the areas where these cases have happened, centered mostly in New York, Boston, Wisconsin, Chicago. But there's also some on the West Coast, Arizona, California, around the Great Lakes. Yeah, this map is interesting. Some cases in Florida, kind of through the Appalachians, all water-related, folks. All of them. Now, what I found is that the human body produces something called GHB in extremely minute quantities. It's just a natural progress, something that the body puts out. Well, some parents in Wisconsin had their sons disappear, later found in water under very unusual circumstances. And the coroners came back and said, oh yeah, it's just accidental drowning, let's forget it. The parents went out and they decided that, hey, that dog doesn't hunt, and they wanted their own autopsy, and they paid for it. And they went through their own drug screening, and on a common body found by coroners across the United States, they test for 24 drugs and narcotics. They do not test for GHB. A private autopsy can scan up to 24, 48, 72, 100 different drugs and narcotics. It just so happens that a couple of these cases had huge amounts of GHB in their system. Now, GHB is also called a date rape drug. Except these people weren't on any date, and they were in a public place, and how they got the GHB in their system is the million-dollar question. And unfortunately, the word hasn't gotten out to many people or coroners to change their policy and start testing for GHB. So in many of these cases, even today, where a body's found in water, they'll just say, oh, it's an unexplained death. No suspicious circumstances. Let's just forget it. But they make no effort to understand how the person got in the water. Because in all of these cases, there's no witnesses. And you say, well, Dave, how can that be? Well, that's very peculiar. And which is one of the reasons why I wrote that book. It was a step outside of the standard paradigm of missing 411. Even though it fit. No witnesses, no scent trail. Lots of times the weather was bad. They brought in trackers, they couldn't track anywhere. Lots of times a person was missing in a bar, and there were no tracks going from that bar through the snow to ponds and lakes and things where these people were eventually found. How can that be? Right. Now, the two cases today, real whodunits. And the first one is from an area I know pretty well, Colorado. Lived there for 10 years. This is a case about a man named Paul Aragon, 34 years old, a young guy. Kind of fits that profile mode of every other missing 411, a sobering coincidence case. Young man, healthy, in his 20s, early 30s. He was working in the Littleton and Lakewood area of Colorado. Those are somewhat suburbs of Denver. He was living out of his truck with his dog. He also had a 13-year-old daughter that was living with his parents. He cared about his family, cared about his daughter, loved his mom, talked to her regularly, etc. But he wasn't making enough money to really break out on his own. That's why he was living in his truck. On May 2nd of this year, 2025, a Bloomfield police officer, Bloomfield's kind of between Boulder and Denver, was on routine patrol. And he's driving around at 3:15 in the morning, and he observes a truck with its engine running and its lights on near a construction site adjacent to the Wood Springs Suite Hotel. This is exactly what the policeman should be doing. Lots of times there's theft going on around construction sites. You see a car at 3 o'clock in the morning with its lights on adjacent to it. Yeah, I would check that out. So he pulls up to the truck, lights it up, walks up. There's nobody inside. Looks inside and there's a dog in there. Engine's running, door's unlocked. Now, my initial gut, if I was the police officer, is that, well, the guy's maybe in the construction area, snooping around, maybe thinking about something to steal, sees me drive up in the police car. He's not coming back to the car. So you're there with the dog. What are you going to do? Well, the police officer calls for another unit, and then another unit, and they start searching the area trying to find out where Paul's at. They run a registration check on the truck. It comes back to him. And then in Colorado, it also comes back to your phone number. So the police call the phone number. Paul doesn't answer. They sent one of the policemen over to the hotel, which was very close, and they find out he's not checked in there. So what do the police have? They really have nothing. It's not parked illegally. It's not on private property. The engine's running, dog's inside, nobody's there. You have no right to seize the truck. And they didn't. But they close it up, turn the lights off, turn the engine off, and they leave the dog inside. And they leave a note for the next shift to come out and check and see if the truck's still there and if the dog is still inside. So the next day, May 3rd, officers go back out, check the truck, still there, nobody's around, but the dog's still inside. So police officers are just like you and me. They have a soft spot in their heart for dogs. If that was me, I would have called for animal control for them to take the dog, give him food and water, and let's see what happened. Either call his parents or find out how they can get the dog back to the owner. So they did have animal control out. They close and lock the truck, and they write a report about what they found. On May 8th, 5 days later, Paul's mom reports him missing to the police. She has no idea that the truck was stopped in Bloomfield. She reported to the police that she hadn't seen him since April 28th or April 29th. And she called the employer, his employer, and he hadn't showed up to work since May 5th. And she said, that's not my son. He showed up all the time. He worked. So she hadn't heard from him in 8-9 days. He didn't show up for work on May 5th. So it had been at least 3, 4, 5, 6 days since anyone had seen him. So they file a missing person report on Paul Aragon. Days go, weeks go. And this is really the tragedy of missing people. Because the days that you don't hear from them, it plays heavy on your heart every day. And then when the phone rings, you get that strange feeling in your heart that something maybe real bad is happening. Well, August 25th of this year, a City of Boulder vegetation crew was doing work on an open space district near the Flatirons Vista trailhead near Highway 93 and 128. The Flatirons area is an interesting place. When you're driving by it on the highway, it has slants in it like giant flat rocks, just like an iron flat. Many, many flat pieces of granite, huge pieces. Unmistakable. And this was near Highway 93, 128. Well, they're working in that Coal Creek area along the creek. This isn't a big river, folks. And what they do is they find a body in the water. They call the police, they come out, and they recover a male's body that was given to the coroner. The Boulder County coroner identifies the body as Paul Aragon. They later list the cause of death as accidental drowning. No explanation. Nothing about what he was or wasn't wearing. The body was on the opposite side of the road as the Flatirons Vista Trail was 150 yards away. So let's go over this map. This is where police found his truck at the Wood Spring Suites in Broomfield. This is where his body was found, over at the Vista Trailhead. It's about a 12-minute drive of 8.4 miles. It's pretty much a straight line from the suites to this location. Now, this area out in here, this is all open fields. There's nothing really out there. And this is the mountains up in here. Been out in this area many, many times. 2-lane road, not a heavy amount of traffic late at night, early in the morning, but during the daytime it can get pretty heavy. So Paul's parents get the call that his body has been found and identified. And his parents said that the hardest job they ever did was telling Paul's 13-year-old daughter that her dad had passed away under unexplained circumstances. Police said that the death was not suspicious. Whenever I hear this, I just shake my head and go, what is going on here? Questions. How did Paul end up 8 miles from his truck? No, he didn't walk that, folks. He did not walk that. How did he and his truck end up 20 miles from his work site? How did police even explain how he ended up in the water? But these are very, very common circumstances for a 411 case. No witnesses, no explanation, and law enforcement doesn't want to even try to explain it. Okay, so there's no bullet holes in him, he doesn't have a fractured skull, he doesn't have a broken neck, nothing suspicious here, let's move on. That's the attitude. Now, when these cases happen 1, 2, 3 in a jurisdiction over 10, 15, 20 years, it can easily be sloughed off as, nothing here. But what if you have a jurisdiction that has a lot of cases? How do they continually deny? Again, Boston, New York, Wisconsin. They're the ones that have a lot of these cases. And then the other location is the UK. How many times have I told you about cases just like this in the UK? Dozens. Well, we're going to talk about another case in the UK. But before we leave Paul's case, Paul may not have been a wealthy man with a lot of assets. And his parents maybe didn't have the political pull to demand answers. But police later told his parents that they found CCTV footage of someone running from his truck where police had found it. And it wasn't him. So who was it? Why would that person have been in Paul's truck? Isn't that suspicious? Now, if somebody has political pull, if they have money, if they have friends in government, there would be a lot more time spent on this case. Unfortunately, for Paul's daughter and his parents, there's not going to be anything done with this. The case will be forgotten within a year, and we'll move on in life. But I'm telling you, these cases have a thread that works through all of them. Now, did they release to the parents or the public what they found in Paul's system? No. Did they test for GHB? I guarantee they did not. So keep that thought in your head as we move on to case number 2. Second case involves the UK. These UK cases all involved unexplained deaths with the circumstances unknown, primary cause of death drowning. What is the UK? The UK is an island surrounded by water that has a lot of inland water as well. This is the first time I've dealt with a police officer that disappears in the UK. And this is a prime time age example of what I'm talking about. 28 years old, Rehan Akhtar, missing November 23rd, 2025 at 1 a.m. in the morning. Originally from Llanelli. He joined the South Wales Police as a community support officer in Cardiff in October 2021. He left to become a constable based in Swansea in September of 2023. Let's hold everything for a second. Oh, Swansea. That's right, Dave did a case out of there. Oh, Cardiff. Dave did a case out of there. Is that just pure coincidence? I don't know. Well, on November 22nd, Rehan met friends in Bristol. Oh, how many cases have I told you about in Bristol? Yeah. And he went out for a night of fun with his buddies. He was spending the night at a local hostel. Smart. You notice they're not driving long distances. No, he's going to go spend the night in the city. Let's explain this. So he was a constable in Swansea here. About an hour and 34-minute drive, or about 80 miles, to Bristol. Okay? And there's a big river, and there's a harbor there, too. Got it? Well, he goes out partying with his friends. Sometime during the night, near 1 a.m. on November 23rd, somehow, some way, he gets separated from his friends. They couldn't find him. How many times has that happened? I've explained this to you probably close to 150 times in my book and in videos. Friends just can't explain where they went. They're just gone. Well, later that morning, he didn't return to his hostel, and he was reported as missing. He didn't have a way to get home. He was riding with friends. So, November 24th, police divers are in Bristol Bay, and they find a body. At 10:39 a.m., they bring the body up, and it's Rehan. And he's pronounced deceased, and his body is transferred to the coroner. Coroner says he died from drowning with unexplained circumstances, but nothing suspicious. They did a 2-day inquest, with the inquest being continued in February of 2026. Avon and Somerset police stated that the death was not suspicious. I may not be the sharpest knife in the drawer, but if the circumstances are unexplained, how can you blatantly say that the death is not suspicious? Right? Am I missing something here? I hear this time after time. I don't get it. It's like a verbal gobbledygook. It doesn't make any sense. The chief constable for Rehan's department stated that he was shocked and saddened to hear of his death. He said that during his time on the department, Rehan served with pride and professionalism. And he said he was greatly respected by his peers and his supervisors. Well, I can tell you for a fact, a lot of police officers are not respected by their peers and police officers. So, must have been a good guy. Now I want you to put your feet up for a second. And I want you to think about these questions. Number one, what were the circumstances that brought the divers searching that harbor? That was never explained. Nobody saw them go in the water. So what are they doing there? Do so many people go missing and they just know they're going to be found there that they start searching there? And if that's the case, Houston, we have a problem. Did Rehan know how to swim? Seems like a basic question. And how exactly did his friends lose track of him? Was everybody drunk? That doesn't seem possible. The big question. When the coroner found out the cause of death was drowning, they also determined the time of death based on physical conditions of the body. So what was his time of death? They declared him deceased at 10:39 a.m. But when was the actual time of death? They haven't released that. A lot of times in the cases I've written about, they lose track of somebody at 1 a.m., but they put the cause of death at 5 p.m. the next day. Well, where was he? What were the contents of his stomach? This will also tell the time of death. As an example, if Rehan went out with his friends at 6 o'clock the night before he went missing, then his stomach would still be working through that meal if he died at 1 a.m. But if he died at 5 p.m. the next day, there might not be anything in his stomach. Important points. The other one is, what was his alcohol level in his system? Was there GHB in his system? Like I said, I'd bet $100 nobody's testing for that. Now, I've explained to you before that coroners have asked me to give presentations at their conferences on GHB, and what I found, each time I get turned down by the organizers. They don't want me to talk about it. The other important point to me is, what clothes was he wearing when he was found? Are those the same clothes that he was wearing when he left? Are his clothes on the body correctly? And you may think, oh, that's bizarre, Dave. No, a lot of times people are found with the shirts on inside out, underwear on backwards. No, this happens all the time, folks. How many people have disappeared and been later found drowned in Bristol in the UK in the last 20 years? How many? I don't think they're going to tell you, folks, because that number may stun too many. When I've done work looking at cases in the national park system, they have files on all those missing cases. They admit to it. Many times they won't release them. I would bet anything that the UK has a national file on every one of these missing cases. And what's the thread? As far as I know of, 95, 98% are all men. Same percentage are between the ages of 20 and 35. Nobody ever sees them go in the water. They've all been drinking, or a high percentage of them have been drinking. And then later they're found to have drowned. That's kind of the thread every one of those cases has. But there's probably 100 other cities around the world that sit on harbors, on rivers, that don't have this issue. Yet there's a few concise cities in the US and the UK that have a lot of these cases. And why is that? That's something that's always bothered me about this. What is it about those cities? Well, I can tell you that in the United States, at least in one jurisdiction, huge jurisdiction that has these cases, those coroners know something weird is going on. As I've told you guys a dozen times in the past. The head coroner for that jurisdiction said, Dave, well, you know something very strange is going on. Because in many of these cases, we can't even determine the cause of death. And that's not right. They're found in the body of water, they're dead, but they're not drowned. And we're scientists. We're supposed to figure out why someone dies. And we can't. So we know something really, really unusual is happening. You're onto something big, Dave. That's the head coroner for this huge jurisdiction said it. So when people say, oh, you know, this is nothing, Paulides just making stuff up. No, folks. No. Other people much higher up in this world than I have confirmed that we're onto something big. Big, I don't know what. They don't know what. But I would say that the powers to be don't want that message relayed to the rest of the coroners in the U.S. If you're a physician, and I know there's many of you watching, and you have a coroner that's a friend, pass this along to him. Let him know. Because there's probably a 50-50 chance that sooner or later in the next 30 years, these cases are going to come around to them. As an example, Vancouver, British Columbia. They have a lot of these cases as well. But they're strange cases where feet float up to the surface. Yeah. Feet from dead bodies float up to the surface that are supposedly in water. But that doesn't happen everywhere. It only happens in a few specific places. Because there's bodies all over the world. But how come we don't find feet floating all over the world like they do in British Columbia? I'm just saying. Our world is a very unusual place. And once you realize that, and you open your mind up to understanding the facts of how unusual it is, to me, life becomes much more interesting. Thank you for being here, taking the time, share the video. And remember, kindness. It's free. Doesn't cost anything. And really, it's something we all need more of in life. If we considered kindness a monetary fund, and every time you were kind, a deposit was made into your fund, think about how nice everyone would be. Well, maybe, if God's watching, that's happening. Be safe. Be kind. Paulides is out.